Hey everyone, on this episode of Inside the Mind, a podcast about athletes, I have Robert Broten, who is a performance coach from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and he actually has a background in neurolinguistics, which is quite unique, and speaking with him, I learned a lot about his field and how it can help athletes. Won't spill too much of it though, so roll the intro. I know you kind of mentioned before off air that hockey is like, I guess, the primary sport you're working with. Are you a big hockey fan as well? Or are you more so just like on the coaching side, kind of following hockey?
Well, I mean, being a Canadian, I'm definitely a hardcore hockey fan. I grew up playing hockey. I didn't play a high level of hockey or pro hockey or anything like that, but I know the game. I know the game pretty well. Been around the game a lot in my life, and getting into, as a mental coach, I work with a lot of different athletes. But in hockey, we're so hockey rich that I typically work with a lot of hockey players.
Yeah.
And when you work really closely with an athlete in whatever sport, I also work with another athlete in rowing, and I don't know anything about rowing, but listening to her and working with her, you really learn a lot about, in depth about the sport. So hockey is another one where, I know a lot about it, but when you start working with pro athletes, you hear some of the things that they're working on, that they want to adapt into their mental game. You get a lot of insight. So, then you get a lot of, obviously a lot of experience that way too, right? Because I teach them the tools, but the fun part is always learning how to take the tools that are taught and to apply them to their level of sport, to their mindsets, and so on. So that's the fun part. But yeah, I'm definitely a hardcore hockey fan. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of the beauty, I think, of kind of being a performance coach is what you learn in one sport. The foundation of it applies to many sports, or probably all sports throughout the world. So
that's right.
I think it's good for people not to get too hung up on, if they, only played hockey in their life or only played basketball, to only take on hockey and basketball clients per se, and to maybe, experiment and branch out with other athletes. And you'll be surprised, how much of what you do as a hockey player or basketball player applies to other sports, and kind of based on that, a consistent theme through, most of my episodes and everything when I speak with people in the industry is the things we're teaching an athlete in a sport is really just like life lessons to a certain extent. So life lessons apply to all different situations, and kind of getting back to the point of, what something that a hockey player is going through, the general foundation of it, tennis players, basketball, rowers go through as well.
That's exactly it. And, we learn these tools sort of organically, either through social media or through friends or through our amateur days of playing sports. We learn sort of how to be present. We learn some visualization techniques. We learn all of these concepts, but really what a mental coach, what I find is a lot of my value is being able to take the common tools that you're talking about, but how to adapt them to your sport, to your life. That's what's challenging for people, because it's easy to say, okay, well, we know how to be present. We know how important being in the moment is, but that might be different if you're a golfer or if you're a football player. That might be different if you're a tennis player or you're in rowing. There's certain things that, it's hard to adapt just a philosophy. So as a coach, I find that, for me, the biggest support for my athletes is to show them how to use these tools on a day-to-day basis, month to month, season to season, and how to take the same tools but adapt them to them, their sport, what they're going through, and show them that process. And that's really where you get the meat of and the success from all of this work.
For sure. Yeah, I agree 100%. Another thing too that kind of you sparked that I was kind of thinking of is really when you're applying what you learn to different sports and you look at the kind of the coach athlete relationship, not only are you helping the athlete out, but to a certain extent, the athlete is helping you out to be a better coach. There's almost that dual relationship when you're kind of, it doesn't have to be, I guess, for new sports. It could be for any client really, but I'm always looking at clients as a learning opportunity and how can I be better as a coach and move forward.
For sure. And that's the experience that I'm speaking to. So, I start working with hockey players and then specifically with goalies, and I've never played goal in my life. But when you hear all of the stories from the goalie, I have a lot of insight now on on what a goalie goes through, what they think, how they prepare, how they recover, how their body feels afterwards, what kind of things are they saying, when they're standing there all by themselves, what's going through their heads. That's not what common people that don't play that position, we're not thinking about those things. So it's hard to get their insight. So hearing their stories and then applying the tools and the techniques and the therapy and getting the best out of them, that's where you gain a lot of experience. And now I have other goalies coming to me and working with me because I do have that insight. So you're right. Working with a variety of different athletes in different sports, it just makes me a better coach.
Yeah. Do you ever kind of have those like aha moments where you're working, through your work with different athletes and specifically hockey players, you kind of think back to when you yourself played hockey and maybe, you think of certain situations you might have approached them differently or reacted differently? Because for myself, that was, I always kind of talk about it, but it was, I guess, bantam or I think that's the age group where they started introducing like contact in hockey.
Right.
And so, that was a huge thing, was like the fear or the worry of being hit. And kind of, I always kind of, when I speak with hockey players now, really, and we talk about how to get over the fear and worry about things, I kind of wish in the back of my head, I knew some of these things, 10, 15 years ago when I was myself playing hockey.
Yeah. And in my therapy, what I do, we always try to find the root cause. So it's a little bit, I come from a different angle with a player. So when we're talking about fears, or if we're talking about anxiety, I don't really necessarily want to know what's going on in the now that's causing that fear. I want to go back to, where did that fear come from? What's the root cause of it? So we can sort of I can use my skills, my therapy, my training to help them pull that out of their unconscious mind, get that root cause out of there, get that feeling of anxiousness or anger or sadness or whatever it might be that's getting in your way, pull that root cause. And that's what we focus on a lot in my therapy and the work that I do with my players, is finding the root. And then once we can pull that root out, and then all of a sudden the other stuff is a lot easier to manage because there's no emotional attachment to it. So even though they might be entering into, a training camp that they've never been to before, and they used to have a lot of fear or anxiousness about going there, now they don't feel that anxiety as much. They don't feel that feeling in their body, and then they can manage those thoughts because they're not feeling it so much. It's easy for them to go, okay, well, I know this is new. I know that this is a pro training camp. I know I want to make the team, but I just got to focus and stay in the moment and, do my training and stick to the program, right? Stick to the process. And there's a mental process as long as a physical process and a dietary process, right? Like training is all of those things encompassing. So we can just sort of keep it simple that way, if that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. Was there kind of, do you kind of remember any instances when you yourself were a hockey player that maybe you could have benefited from somebody like yourself right now?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I just being present and learning how to separate my thoughts from what's going on in the game. And I remember playing, and again, I didn't play a high level of hockey, but when I was out there, and I wasn't a great player, I definitely didn't have a lot of confidence because I didn't get a lot of ice time, right? So that piled on to my lack of confidence. But when I was out there, I was having fun. I was trying hard, but there was definitely I was definitely inside my own head and did not have my peripheral open, didn't see the game like I see it now. And if there was one thing I could go back in time and take with me, it's definitely learning how to stay present.
Yeah. It's interesting kind of how you mentioned that, you never played a high level of hockey, but you still kind of dealt with these things. And I think that's an important point to get across, that it's not just, elite level athletes or NHL pros or OHL or WHL or QMJHL players that could benefit from a mental performance coach. It's athletes of all levels. Athletes of all levels go through mental struggles. And again, kind of thinking about the point where the things we're telling the athlete not only help them in sport, but help them in life in general. I think that every athlete could benefit potentially from a mental performance coach, whether they're playing house league or AAA.
100%. And again, it's going back to understanding how to learn the tools. So it doesn't matter if you're playing Atom, if you're playing Pee-wee, hockey, football, if you're just starting out as a marathon runner, we need to learn how to be present We need to learn how to visualize and mentally rehearse properly. And to do those things really requires the ability to sit down and be able to calm our mind for more than just 10 seconds, right? We got to be able to do that for 10, 15 minutes where we can get some clarity so we can do the work on the inside. But that work is really hard, to program our unconscious, to see our future, to be able to tell ourselves how we're going to feel through adversity. To front load all of that is very difficult if we can't sit still in our mind, right? So, if you can learn at a young age how to look at your weekend ahead and see that tournament and see yourself scoring some goals and feeling yourself in those moments, in that picture in your mind, feeling the confidence that you're going to have when you're out there. We can teach kids how to do this. Now you're teaching them how to see what they want instead of having those pictures pop up of fear and anxiety and I have to please mom and dad, or I hope I get a lot of goals because there's going to be scouts there, or I want to show off for my girlfriend or whatever. Like there's all sorts of things that young players think, and it's all natural, but it's teaching them how to manage that. Now it's the same tools that we would use for a pro player that's really learning how to dial into the moment as a pro goalie, how to use the anthem to their advantage, how to create anchors in their performance, right? So that's at an elite level, but they still have to learn how to calm their mind and to do that work. So it's a progression. Just like our skill set is a progression, just like working out in the gym is a progression. It all starts from the basics, and then you build upon that one step at a time. And as a mental coach, you're right. Everybody kind of needs or could benefit from one, because you really have to understand the power of your own mind. You have to understand how it works. So now you can work your mind better in any moment that comes up. And we all have adversity. We all have, challenging things in our life, in our personal life, in our sport, in our relationships that we go through. So it's just about how can we manage our thoughts? How can we manage our emotions? And that goes back to learning some key tools that build the foundation of a real strong mental game.
Yeah. What did you mean by using the anthem to the athlete's advantage? Because I don't know if maybe I'm thinking on the right track here, but even when I watch hockey games and they do the anthem beforehand, I sometimes I get goosebumps even by it if it's a huge game or something. Is that kind of what you're alluding to
Right?
there? Like getting those goosebumps and let's turn this fear, I guess, into motivation, I guess, or let's turn this fear into something positive or excitement, I guess, or whatever adjective you want to use.
Well, definitely we as spectators have that, right? Like sometimes I have a buddy of mine too, and we're notorious for crying during anthems sometimes, because sometimes it's just so powerful and so overwhelming, and we're such hockey geeks that, we feel it. But as a player, that's not where your mindset's going to be at. So we're watching it on TV. We're falling into the storylines. We're falling into the moment. And that's about the only thing that we have in common with the athlete is about staying in the moment. So what I meant about the anthem is that you can use that as a performance anchor. And I teach people that you can burn into your neurology a feeling, you already have it, a feeling of confidence or just invincibility. Like there's players out there that have played those games where they just felt like every pass they made was crisp, every shot they took went in the net, like they were just unstoppable. So you can create these performance anchors that you can set off with a trigger. And a trigger could be maybe you pull on your earlobe, you bite your lip, you hear a sound, there's a song that plays. But in sports, we can use these tools now, right? Because remember, it's about how do we use the tools for the sport, for the player in the moment. So it's using a performance anchor and using the national anthem so that when they hear the same song, right? Because the anthems don't change. It's always sung the same way. It's the same tune. You hear it over and over again. If you can condition your mind to every time that you hear the anthem, that you feel confident, that you feel just so invincible, your emotions come up, that it's that those feelings of performance come up, right? The ones that we want. So you have to be able to front load that. And that's called a performance anchor. So when you get to an elite level, because if you're playing Pee-wee, you're not necessarily listening to both anthems before a hockey game. You're just not there. But when you get to be in the minors, in junior even, those are moments where goalies and players can really anchor themselves into the moment, and it's like a switch that gets turned on inside them that peaks their focus, that peaks their performance. And these are performance anchors. So, and you can create all sorts of those, but using the national anthem is definitely a good way for hockey players to do that.
For sure. It's such like an emotional kind of music or emotional song, so to say. There's so much pride involved in hearing the national anthem, and specifically, just the one example I can think of recently or more recently was when Canada won the World Juniors in the Czech Republic. I guess it would be earlier this month. And afterwards, I mean, just seeing this is a bit of a different example, I guess, because in World Juniors they play the anthem afterwards. But just kind of seeing the joy and the pride on their faces being Canadian and winning, it just kind of speaks to the fact of how important or how emotional anthems can be for some athletes. And so I really agree with your assessment of using that as performance anchor and really kind of psyching up the athlete, so to say, in layman's terms, about getting ready for the game to play ahead.
Right. Yeah. And I always tell every one of my athletes that performance, whether you're in sports, whether you're on stage speaking in front of thousands of people, whether you're the host of a podcast, doesn't matter what you're doing. Performance is all an emotional game. So if you're feeling anxious, that's an emotion, right? So is that a good emotion? Obviously not. Is confidence a good emotion? Yeah. Is feeling invincible a good emotion? Absolutely. Trust, love. These are all emotions that we forget that are such a key part of not only us being human, but in sports. So we have to be able to pick the ones that serve us and not get attached to the ones that don't serve us. And so you look at your national anthem example of Team Canada after the game was over. They're not focused on the game. They've just won. They're spilling over with emotion. The pride is coming out during that anthem. Now, if you look at a national anthem at the beginning of a Stanley Cup final, those players are definitely not in that state of mind. They're not exuberant. They're not overflowing with emotion. They still haven't played the game yet, right? So they're in control of their emotions. And so those players are just focusing on their breath. They're trying to find the moment. They're going over the verbal anchors that they may have set in their head to bring up those emotions that are going to serve them, right? So in each individual, it's a little bit different. Mm-hmm. So, sports is all about how you can control your emotions, and how you can spike them at certain moments intentionally to get another level of performance out of you and out of your team.
Yeah. Kind of just kind of my last point on the whole concept of anthems and them being so emotional and helping you spike your performance is probably about 3 weeks ago. I was at the Detroit Lions Green Bay Packers game in Detroit, and probably about halfway through the second quarter, they honored like some veterans that were in the building. And of course, the building just went absolutely crazy. And it was very notable that after that, specific honoring time, it was, maybe a couple of minutes where the play on the field, jumped up exponentially. Like the next couple of plays were just so high intensity and just were so quick and so fast and just all those kind of cliche terms, I guess. But just to kind of give you some more evidence, I guess, that was one real scenario that stuck out in my mind as you were speaking. I just kept thinking over and over that, the whole building erupted and then the players fed off that as well.
That's right. It comes up in you unconsciously. So, it's about controlling it and using it to your advantage or, separating yourself from it if you know that it's going to bring you down. But it's palpable for sure. And in those big games, sometimes that energy can be too overwhelming. Sometimes it brings up the storylines of the importance of this game. It's a final, it's a Stanley Cup, it's a Grey Cup, it's a Super Bowl. Going into the Super Bowl weekend, there's so many distractions. You have the media. You've got the storylines. Players are asked the same questions. It's really hard for them to talk about the game, but not get too caught up in the moment of the big game and try to keep to themselves and to stay in their own, mental sweet spot. It's difficult. It's a balance. So there's tools that you need to know how to use well, that take practice using to be able to compete and perform when it's time.
It's interesting how you said that sometimes you can almost get like too excited or too emotional. And I think one of the main real concepts I talk about with athletes that I coach is, if you think of it as a scale or a spectrum, your excitement level or arousal level, whatever term you want to use, that there's a low point and a high point, but we want to find some sort of equilibrium or some sort of middle ground where you're both kind of relaxed and focused at the same time. And I think that's really hard for athletes to judge, because they'll either be too excited or too tense, or too relaxed and not focused. And find that middle ground is really difficult. I find in my experience for athletes, and that's usually where I try to start, because that's, I think, a good foundation moving forward is kind of, let's find that equilibrium to begin with, and then everything else kind of follows in line after that.
That's right. And I love working with younger players and younger athletes, because you get to teach them these things before they get into the position where they're forced to learn it real fast, and sometimes the hard way, right? And it's all about understanding performance. So when you're an athlete and you're on the ice, you're on the field, you're on the court, your brain has to be calm. Your brain has to be not engaged so much in the storylines or the emotions, or who's in the crowd or who you're up against, and those types of things that could bring you down. It's about really staying in the moment.
Yeah. Has there been something you through all your work with athletes and specifically hockey players, has there been kind of one common denominator, maybe for 90 or 95% athletes, that you find that's kind of, you're working on again and again, and you see as a real consistent theme among athletes?
Yeah, I think it's probably the same for me. It's my greatest problem too, is constantly staying in the moment and constantly being able to go, okay, here's a thought that I'm having that's creating these feelings that I'm getting caught up in. Is that serving me well? Where's that feeling coming from? I mean, I think that's what it's all about, is the art of mindfulness, really, right? I think that's and it's never a surprise, but it just makes me, what is surprising is that how often we have to remind ourselves to be present. Because if we don't keep practicing mindfulness, we're going to lose it. It's like a muscle. If you don't use it, it's going to go away. And we're not really geared as humans to be calm and peaceful in our mind. We're blessed with a conscious mind that allows us to think and be brilliant, but at the same time, it's got its drawbacks, right? And calming down our mind to go play a sport that you love and to be at your very best and to be focused and to be intense at the same time requires a certain level of presence.
Yeah.
Right? And like you said, you have to have your body. So if you're a football player, your emotions, you want to run through a brick wall for your team. So you got to feel that in your body, but at the same time, your mind can't match that and be buzzing and at a high level and be in high beta range where, you're not allowing your good instincts and your habits to come out. You're not allowing your skill to come out. And that's the problem when we overthink, is we get too much of our conscious mind working and not enough of our unconscious mind working. And there's the balance. So you're right. It is difficult. But if you can teach kids at a young age to understand that, okay, you need to be calm in your mind, but your body's got to feel invincible. Your body's got to feel confident. Your body's got to feel quick. When you start teaching them those skills at a young age, they build upon that, right? And then it's not that big of a deal when they get to junior or when they get to college. They sort of know how to prepare. They've been conditioned now to have that good foundation that they can build off of.
Yeah. For kind of staying in the moment, that's something that I dealt with a bit, because I'm currently like training for some tennis tournaments. So staying in the moment is something that I've tried to practice a lot while playing tennis. And maybe a couple of weeks ago, I had purchased a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, and they really talk about staying in the moment and really keeping that arousal level, I guess, neutral, or maybe, at that equilibrium that's, optimal. So one of the exercises they talk about is to not get too, as a way to not get too caught up in the moment, is they gave a bit of scenario, and imagine that there's three people. There's the two tennis players and the umpire, and, player A hits a really good shot. So player A will think that's a good shot and, a good outcome, I guess. Player B will think that's a bad outcome, but the umpire just sees it the shot for what it is. It's a shot that, went into the court and then bounced out. And it really kind of stresses the importance of having the mindset as the umpire, and just looking at things for what they are, not attaching values to them or good or bad. And that helps you kind of stay in the moment, or to a certain extent, keep that, your mental arousal level at an optimal level, where you're not getting too tense or too relaxed based on outcomes. So that's just something that kind of based off kind of what you said, how that's so common in athletes, that me myself, as I'm, still trying to train as an athlete as much as I can, that I'm still dealing with myself as well. And that exercise really helped me to the past couple of days playing tennis to kind of keep my mental game, I guess, at the optimal level.
Yeah. And if you can do a lot of visualizations and mentally rehearse those moments ahead,
mm-hmm.
right? If you can front load your mind and you can see tournaments and matches ahead of you, that you want to incorporate new skills, you want to incorporate that mindset that you were just talking about. You can mentally rehearse. And again, these are the tools that I teach my athletes to use to incorporate, to make them better. Right. So you can see yourself with that mindset. You can see yourself with that positive self-talk. So if you do lose a point, it's not a loss. It's just an
mm-hmm.
outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what are you focused on? Well, you're focused on winning the next point, getting the next outcome, being in the moment, making sure that your spin, your angle, your body positioning, all of that is coming from, the unconscious level. You're not
mm-hmm.
thinking about how to play. Your best is going to come from that little kid inside you that just goes out and plays well. Right. It's a knowingness. It's at the unconscious level. So that's where the balance is to understand that, okay, if I'm overthinking, that's too much conscious brain at work and not enough unconscious brain. And at the unconscious level, that's where our skill lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's where our behaviors are all stored. That's where our habits are. That's where your greatness really is. And if you can balance that with staying in the moment, then you can be creative and you can be free and you can feel confident in your creativity. So when you're going back and forth over the net, volley after volley after volley, that's uncommon. And sometimes players will buckle because their body's just not used to an 18 volley,
right.
encounter. So they just buckle because they don't know. But if you can hold the moment and you can be there and you can stay with it, that's where we find greatness, right? So if we look at it from that perspective and we use our mental rehearsal tools to see ourselves at our best, to see ourselves focusing on our breath, telling ourselves that, hey, I've got this, that wasn't my point, that was just an outcome, whatever verbal anchors that you've got to keep yourself aligned with winning that game, mm-hmm. and to keep your emotions in the right space. And I say over and over with all of my athletes that, and I have to remind them because we forget, but I have to remind them that your thoughts create emotions. Now, this isn't brand new, right? No. We all know that, but we forget that what we think and what we say to ourselves are direct suggestions to our unconscious mind. So we better be really good and really mindful of what we're putting into our own head with our words, right? And if we know the power of that, then we can use that power. We can purposely front load different verbal anchors in our performance that keep us motivated, that keep us feeling confident, that keep us in that space through all the adversity, all the ups and downs of a game.
Yeah, and like how you mentioned at the beginning of that was how important visualization is, and that's something that I've started to incorporate a lot in my tennis matches as well. Is if I hit a a shot that goes out or hits the net or something, it's not the outcome that I wanted, I'll, first thing I'll do is take a deep breath real quickly, because of course in tennis, you don't have all the time in the world. You don't have a bench to go to or something. But kind of in the, as the play's getting set up again, I take a deep breath and then I close my eyes for maybe even a split second or just a second. And I try to visualize what that shot will look like next time, the outcome that I want. And it's pretty crazy. That another kind of consistent theme I talk about in this podcast is just how, and you've alluded to it, already, it's just how powerful the mind is. And, just when you train your mind to do something related to athletics, there's a lot of benefits to it, just as much as physical practice. The mental practice can just be so important to an athlete. And I'm experiencing that firsthand every day playing tennis, that when I train my mind as a tennis player, my play on the court improves exponentially.
Absolutely. And our mind is the last thing in our entire body to develop, right? Our skill is there, our conditioning is there, our strength is there, our size is there, sometimes at a very early age.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter how good or how big we might be, how quick we might be, how skillful we might be, our mind is still our mind. It's the same for everybody. It doesn't really fully form until we're in our mid-20s. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really start to get a lot of things until we're 17, 18 years old. So until that conscious part of our mind really starts to develop, we kind of, then we can start to rewire, and then we can start to use these tools really effectively. So that's why an athlete like yourself has the skill to play at a high level. You've got the conditioning, but now you're realizing, wow, my mind is kind of a little bit behind everything else. You got to go back and catch up. And it's that way with everybody,
Mm-hmm.
athlete or not. We got to go back and fix the things that we got conditioned to when we were younger, the limiting beliefs that we told ourselves that bring on all of these emotions. Because remember, our thoughts create emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So if we see something in our environment that reminds us of a trauma that we have buried deep inside of us, but in our unconscious mind, it doesn't think that way. We just consciously overlook it, but unconsciously, it's going to bring up that fear or that sadness or that anger that we used to once feel. So we got to go back and fix all of that kind of stuff, right? And mental rehearsals are so important because that's how you reprogram. That's how you give your unconscious mind the new instruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree. And kind of one last kind of question I want to ask you before we wrap up here is, what's been kind of the most, we've talked a lot about, different struggles that athletes go through and stuff, but what is one struggle that's really, in your practice or through your coaching that's really stood out to you as surprising? Maybe something that you didn't think would be as common as you thought it could be, or maybe something that you thought would be more common, but it's been, maybe more uncommon than you had thought. Is something, along those lines stick out to you as you kind of think back with the athletes you've worked with?
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind is that it just continues to amaze me how easy our mind is conditioned, and how much we walk around with such baggage, such emotional baggage from things that have happened to us in the past or things that have been said to us, and either through our own thoughts or somebody else's words, we create these unwanted emotions. And I went through this myself. I walked around with a lot of unwanted stuff in my unconscious when I went to school. And when I released it, I thought, wow, that was so easy to release once I allowed myself to.
Mm-hmm.
Once I went, okay, you know what? I know that there's something going on in my head. I know that I'm emotional when things happen. I kind of know what it's revolving around. I'm just going to dive in. And once I did that, I realized how easy it was to change the perspective that is at my unconscious level. And so to your question, it still amazes me when I work with my athletes. We talk about performance tools and being good, and that's one thing. But another level to my therapy or to my coaching is the therapy side of it, where we go back and get rid of those root causes of the anxiety, of the fear, of the frustration, of the anger. And people are so and not just athletes, I say people, because everyone is so afraid to go back and think about those moments because it is painful. It's unwanted for a reason, right? It's emotional, but you got to go back there and face it. And once you do, it's so easy to rejig your mind and to give it a new perspective and to release those emotions. And so it amazes me, after we go through that work, an athlete afterwards just sort of looks at me and says, I feel so much better, and I can't believe how easy that was. Like, I've been carrying this stuff around. I've been carrying this grudge around for 10 years, and I felt this way for so long, and within a couple hours, it's gone. It still amazes me how easy it is for people to change their mind.
Yeah.
It's
really
amazing for me how easy it is for them to let go of their past.
Yeah, really. I have a bit of an educational background in neuroscience, and really just like the plasticity of the brain, I guess, and how the brain can just rewire itself into different neurons that fire in certain ways or whatever it might be. Don't want to get too scientific, obviously, here, but it's just amazing how how much the brain can adapt. And when you train your brain or you train your mind to do something, it will respond to the way you want it to. So just kind of, I think that's a great kind of point to end off on, for people to kind of think about, is just how I guess acceptable to change the brain is, or how much you can change how your brain is wired, and really to have the mindset of no matter what struggle you're going through mentally. I think that if you have the right support staff or the right, support team around you, that the changes can be made to kind of help you get through whatever mental struggle you're going through, related to sports, of course, in this instance, but it applies to life in general.
Life in general, and for everybody to understand that it's at the unconscious level. So just as fast as it was created, you can go back there and reverse it just as quickly. With some of my athletes, I have a neuro-linguistic programming background. So that's really the language between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, and how it speaks to one another neurologically. So it's how we create behaviors, it's how we create habits. It's that sort of language in our mind. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we build up bad habits of, especially in an athletic world. I worked with an athlete that built up a bad habit of, as a defenseman, going into the corner and giving other players a high cross check, mm-hmm. and not ramming them into the boards, but definitely taking a cross checking penalty. And he called me up and said, coach benched me this weekend. I don't know where I've picked up this habit. I know differently. I know my stick should be lower, kind of on the hips of the player and push them off balance. But he says, I'm going into the corner and my stick's up, and I don't know. I've been doing this. I got 3 penalties this weekend, and coach benched me. Mm-hmm. So in neurolinguistic programming, there's this technique called a swish pattern, which takes basically the action. It's like a movie in your mind where you go to that action and where you want the new behavior to exist. So in this case, not cross-checking him in the back and making sure that his hands are lower down on the player's hips. We can instantly, within 5 minutes, change that unconscious program, that unconscious behavior, just by doing a technique where you see it so many times that it overrides the old pattern, the old behavior. And it's very effective if you know how to use this tool. Mm-hmm. So now the player goes back, and 2 years later, I don't think that he's taken another cross-checking penalty, mm-hmm. because at the unconscious level, he just changed the program. He changed the language. And so if you know how to do that, whether it's changing a habit or reversing behavior or releasing a limiting belief that you have that's causing a lot of emotion, you can find the people out there that know how to do this, that can help you release it. And it's a lot easier than people think, right? And we carry it around. It's so real for each of us to feel our unwanted emotions, and we don't want to go back to them, but it's required to get rid of them.
Yeah. I of course, your kind of neuro-linguistic background isn't something that I'm too familiar with, but I see the links between it and helping athletes, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you have a busy day going to different athletes and stuff, so I appreciate you taking a bit of the time of your day to kind of share some of your knowledge in that field, as well as just more so just helping athletes in general.
Yeah, great, Adam. Thanks a lot for having me. I've had fun. Thank you.
Thanks, guys, again for checking out this episode. If you enjoyed any part of it, please share it with your friends and family, and I'll speak to you next time.